So welcome to our class about Parashat Tazria Metzora and Pesach. Every year we read Parashat Tazria Metzora either before Pesach or right after Pesach. This year it's before, so it's definitely something that we should be looking into to glean some understanding, some inspiration of what Pesach is all about. And of course, Pesach, one would say, is about the exodus of Egypt and commemorating and celebrating it. But we live so many thousands of years later, and one can ask the question, what do I care what happened 3,500 years ago? What's irrelevant to me? I live in 2024. So what is irrelevant to me? And that's what we're going to try and take the concept, the idea of Pesach, and make it relevant to us, something that we can meditate throughout the Pesach and really try and internalize that by the end of Pesach we're ready to be in true free liberation. And liberation not in the sense of liberation in the body, but mainly liberation of the mind. Because in Pesach, the original one, the Jews were slaves to Pharaoh, also in their body. And the liberation was physical liberation. But it wasn't only about getting out the body, it was so that they could serve Hashem, and they could have freedom in the mind. And that's really what Pesach is all about. The question is, how does Parashat Tazria Metzora guide us in that way? It talks all about leprosy. Tazria tells us about how he becomes unpure, and Metzora tells us how he becomes pure again. He or she, anyone that gets a leprosy. But what's that got to do with Pesach? What are we to learn from it? We know that the Torah is a guidance, it's a teaching, it's there to inspire us.
Is it to do with the freedom of speech, but how to use the speech?
It's a freedom of speech. Well, it's interesting that you say that because Pesach is the only festival that's all about the mouth. It's about eating, maror and matzah. There are biblical commandments. Any other festival has nothing to do with eating. I know that you eat cheesecake on Shavuot and you eat latkes on Hanukkah, but it's all customs. It's not from the Torah.
Yeah.
On Rosh Hashanah we dip the apple in the honey, but again it's a custom. So the first thing is about eating, is the only chag with eating. But not only is about eating, it's also about talking. We have an obligation to share the story of Pesach with our children. It's the only festival that there's an obligation to actually talk. So let's say on Yom Kippur maybe you need to confess, but it's not so much about saying the words, more like it's about, really remorse and regret inside. Of course, you got to say the words, but the main idea is about the mode of tshuva. Shofar is about blowing the shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Hanukkah is lighting the candles. Shavuot is studying Torah. It's the understanding of the Torah. On Pesach, it's about saying, lehagid. It's about to say the story of the Exodus. And that is why Pesach...
Excuse me, Rabbi, they have a fish delivery for you.
So tell him to take you to Habiba.
Habiba?
Number 51, there's someone there. People are downstairs, they should go there. Thank you. So, on Pesach, because it's all about talking, that's why it's called Pesach. Peh means a mouth, and Sach means to talk. So it's about talking. Sicha, nachon. And in Hebrew, how you say a phone? How do you say phone in Hebrew?
Telephone.
No, that's an English telephone. Giving it an Israeli accent doesn't make it a Hebrew word. Sach rachok.
לא שמעתי אף פעם.
את רואה, אז לפעמים צריך לבוא לשיעור פרשה בשביל ללמוד מילה בעברית.
כל הזמן צריך לבוא.
So sach rachok is the word for a telephone. Why? Sach means to talk and rachok means distance. So Pesach, a mouth that talks. So yes, you're right. Parashat Tazria Metzora is about talking. And Pesach is about talking, but that's a very, it is a connection, I do agree, but Metzora is all about the leprosy, not so much about the cause of the leprosy, which is Lashon Hara. So let's try and find something even closer. What else do we have about Pesach connected to Parashat Tazria and Metzora? Cleaning, yeah, you got to be pure, you got to Pesach, you got to clean, pure. But let's try and understand. So, on Parashat Metzora, which is this week's parasha, we read about how the person who becomes a Metzora becomes a leprosy.
What's leprosy?
Leprosy is a disease that doesn't exist today, but it used to exist in biblical times, and it was a type of an eczema, maybe if I could use that language, even though it was different. It was a rash, an eczema, that would appear on the skin, or it could appear on clothes, or it could appear on the walls of the house. And
If you spoke Lashon Hara, you'd think.
that was a cause. We know because Miriam spoke Lashon Hara and she got leprosy. Moshe Rabbeinu spoke Lashon Hara and he got leprosy. So we know that that's the cause of leprosy. Although the Torah doesn't mention it explicitly. But it just says if there's a leprosy, if there is this patch of eczema on the body, then you go to the Kohen, he checks it, and he tells you if it's impure. Is it regular eczema, where you need to go to a skin doctor, or is it a spiritual disease, ailment, that you need to go to the Kohen doctor, who's going to help you cure it, etc. And the Torah tells us all the different types of colors, hairs, expansion, and so on. That was already last week's parasha. But this week it tells you, okay, let's say you are identified as a Metzora, as a leper. A leper is somebody that has this patch. How do you purify yourself? And the Torah, in this week's parasha, it gives quite an extensive detail on how the person becomes pure. So the Torah tells us he has to make some sacrifices and so on and so forth. He has to sit outside the camp for a few days, quarantine, think about life, meditate. Where's he gone wrong? And then he brings a sacrifice. What's the sacrifice that he brings? Do you know? What? He brings bird, that is true, but what else? So on the first page it says that he brings 2 birds. What else does it say? Huh?
A goat as well?
A goat. Well, let's see if it's a goat or something very similar to a goat. It says in page 721 on verse 10, on the 8th day you should take 2 perfect male lambs. So that's what he needs to bring, 2 lambs. So far, what does the leper have to bring? 2 birds and 2 lambs. And then the Torah tells us in great detail what does he need to do in order to become pure. What does he do with these goats, with these lambs, and with these birds? The Torah then comes and tells us on page 723, it says the following. Let's have a look at verse 21. The title is Offerings of the Poor, Tzarat Safra. So it says, if he is poor and cannot afford the above offerings. What's the above offerings?
2 lambs and 2 birds.
2 lambs and 2 birds. He should take 1 male lamb as a guilt offering, for a wave offering to atone for him, 1/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil as meal offerings, a log of oil, and 2 turtle doves, 2 young doves according to what he can afford, 1 for a sin offering and 1 for a burnt offering. So what happens if he doesn't have any money? What does he do? He brings only 1 lamb, right? Which was a significant saving. Because even today to buy, you go to the butcher, I'm sure, and you look and you say, how much is a pack of lamb, shoulder of lamb, 50 bucks. Wow, that's crazy.
Sold it.
So could you imagine bringing a whole lamb? Even today, how much costs a full lamb? What do you guess?
Today?
Yeah. I don't know, a few £100, maybe £1,000. It's expensive. So for a poor person, I'm sure he could afford it somehow, get the money, put it together, but it makes a big deal. And therefore the Torah says he brings a lesser offering. So far, so good?
Yes.
Now, how many types of sacrifices do we have this extension? If the person is poor, then they can bring a different offering. Does anyone know?
We spoke about it last week, didn't
You tell me. Where? Well, actually, because we said we always read Parashat Tazria and Metzora, so we have it also in last week's parasha. Many times Tazria and Metzora are connected. Where do we have in last week's parasha?
If you are poor.
Yeah, who?
Yes.
Any sacrifice if you're poor. So let me tell you, from all the myriad of sacrifices which we have, and there are many, there are 5 sacrifices, I believe, that change depending on your financial situation. And 2 of them are in Parashat Tazria Metzora. The other 3 are in Parashat Vayikra. You can look at them in later, because we're short on time, we're not going to read it and see. I was planning to, we started later, it's there. But it's to do with somebody who says Hashem's name, swears in vain, somebody who takes from the Mishkan, takes from the belongings of the temple. You can look at witnesses. But 2 of them are in this week's Parashiot, this week and last week. So what's last week? Today we learn about the leper. When the leper is doing the purification, he needs to bring X, and if he can't afford, he brings Y. Where else? Last week. Where last week? Who else brought a sacrifice in last week's parasha? The woman who gives birth. So she had to bring a certain sacrifice, and it was consist of an animal and birds. And if she couldn't afford the animal element, she would bring the birds only. So again, there was one animal less, and it was a significant saving. So far, so good. Now, with regards to these particular sacrifices, that one could bring either more or less, depending on the financial situation. The Torah tells us later, we read it in the oral Torah, in the Talmud, and that they have also something unique about them. And what is that? If the person himself cannot bring it for whatever reason, so let's say in this week's parasha we're talking about the leper, and he cannot bring the sacrifice to the temple, somebody else wants to do it on his behalf.
Yes.
Can somebody else do it on their behalf?
Yes.
The answer is yes. Some sacrifices you could do on behalf of somebody else, and some you can't.
Yes.
These ones you can do on behalf of somebody else. So now this brings us to an interesting question. What's the interesting question? You see, when the sacrifice is static, it's one sacrifice. This is what the Torah says. You got to bring rich, poor, I don't care. This is the sacrifice. So if somebody were to theoretically bring on your behalf, what would they bring? What is mandated for this atonement, this sacrifice? But here that it fluctuates, it depends on your financial situation. What happens if the person who's bringing the sacrifice on behalf of the other person has a different financial status?
Yes. And he can do it.
Okay? So what happens if the poor person is the leper? So let's say we're talking today about Parashat Metzora, so we're talking about the leper, and he needs to bring a sacrifice, and he is poor. So he's not bringing it for whatever the reason is, we're not discussing it now, and somebody else is bringing it, and if somebody else is a rich man. So what does he do? Does he bring a sacrifice because he's doing it on behalf of the poor person? So he's standing in his shoes. So if the poor person were to bring it, he would bring a poor man's sacrifice. So the person who's bringing on his behalf, even though he's rich, brings a poor man or rich man?
Rich. Remember.
You would think poor, but he doesn't. It's a rich man.
It's a
Why?
rich man. You
Because
talk
we
about
say he was the person who was to bring it himself was poor. You're right. But who's bringing it? The rich. So the rich man brings a rich sacrifice. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah? Do you agree with that, or do you
Yeah,
would say?
I agree.
What about you? You agree?
I agree.
Okay. So the Rambam writes that, as we said,
The
he
only
brings.
thing, does the rich man want to do the sacrifice? Because
Of course, the whole reason is he's coming to say, I stand and stand. No one's forcing him. It's not you're bringing instead of him. He's not bringing, so we'll force you. It's the rich man is saying, if he's not bringing, I'm going to do it.
Okay.
I'm generous. I want to do it. You want to be generous? Be generous like you are. You're rich. So bring it. By the way, we're not talking about he would bring £1, he would bring £1 million. You're talking about a bit more, a push. So the rich man can definitely do it.
And does he get a benefit
Yeah,
for
I was
doing
about to
it
say.
on his behalf?
He's doing it on behalf of the other person. So if you do something on behalf of somebody else, so it's on behalf of somebody else. That's how it works. You can't have the cake and eat it. Do it on his behalf. It's actually for me. And anyway, he doesn't have to do it himself anyway.
It's a mitzvah. What is
Of course, 100%. So that's if the rich man is bringing on behalf of the poor man. What happens if it's the other way around? If a rich man was a leper, so he needs to bring the sacrifice. However, he can't, for whatever reason. So the poor man says, I'm going to do the miswah. I'm going to bring it on his behalf. I want to bring his sacrifice. So now there's a poor man. Do we say, you're bringing on behalf of the rich man, so bring like a rich man would have brought? I know you're poor, but doesn't matter. Go force yourself, compromise on something else. Don't go on holiday this year. Bring the rich man sacrifice. Or do we say, no, but he's a poor person. He's bringing it. What would, if he were to be the leper, he would be poor, he would bring little. So he brings little. Which one do you think?
little?
So following, if we were to go based on what we just,
not feel bad.
to make, I'm not feeling bad or not. The poor man says, I want to do it. So he says, what do I need to do? Comfortably, I can bring a poor man sacrifice. If I have to push myself, I have to do the rich man sacrifice. But it's not for me, it's for him. So which one do we go? So if we follow consistency, it should be poor, right? Because just like the rich man, we look at the person bringing, not the person who has it's on his behalf. So to now we should look at the person bringing and not the person on his behalf.
According to his pocket.
However, the Rambam says, no, the poor man has to bring a rich man's sacrifice. Why? You want to do on behalf of the rich man? Okay, so be a rich man, bring a rich man's sacrifice. You can't say, I'm standing in for him and then I'm
Can't
poor.
the rich man just give him the sacrifice?
If the rich man, then we're not talking about that case. Then that's doing a shaliach. But that's a different case. Here we're talking about I'm doing it on his behalf. Of course, if the rich man sent somebody, that would be a different case. Here, he's doing it, standing in for it. And that doesn't really make sense. Because, number one, it's not consistent with the previous case, right? If it would be consistent, it should be. We look at the person bringing. And number two, it doesn't also make sense with the Torah itself, because the Torah says, when a poor man, if the poor man's bringing on his own, so he is a leper, he's done Metzora, he spoke Lashon Hara, whatever, nonetheless, he only has to bring a poor man's sacrifice to atone. So if the guy now is doing, he himself is not even a leper, he hasn't spoken Lashon Hara, he's just doing a mitzvah on somebody else's behalf, so now you're going to slap him with a big bill?
Yeah, but it's not enough to get the rich man pure again.
But why not? He's doing on his behalf. He's the poor man. Why? If it's enough to purify a person, as the Torah tells you, if you're a poor person, it's enough to purify you. So it should be enough to purify the rich man. The rich man wasn't doing it himself anyway. The poor man's doing it on his behalf. So you should do what a poor man can afford. Why are you suddenly making him work harder? Just because he wants to do a mitzvah for somebody else? And it's not consistent with what we said before. So how does it work? So the Rebbe explains a beautiful idea. And the Rebbe says, and this is also we're going to see connected to Pesach and connected to a few other things. All the puzzle comes together. There's quite a few pieces, but we see how it all fits. So the Rebbe says that the idea is very simple. When it comes to richness, it has nothing to do with how much money you have in the bank.
Okay.
Many times people think a rich person, he's got X amount of zeros after the number one. And a poor person, he's got fewer amounts of zeros. But that is not true. That's what the Torah is teaching us over here. And it's the Rebbe quoted the Talmud in the name of Abaye, who was one of the great sages, and he says the following: En ashir, or sorry, en ani ela bedat. Poverty is in the mind.
Yes.
There is no such thing as poverty
Yes.
in the bank. Money you have in the bank, somebody can take away from you, someone can steal it from you. Physical money can be taken, can be seized, but mental richness, nobody can touch. It's all in their head. You know, many times you have people that they're so rich, so wealthy, they have a lot of money. And then when you, let's say, giving charity, they give £1, £5, or even £1,000, but definitely not consistent with what they have. So when it comes to their own riches and their houses and their holidays, they only understand the millions, you know. But when it comes to giving, suddenly they become... Then you have other people that they don't have much, but they care and they share and they give way beyond what they can. What the Torah is teaching us over here, Shalom, is a simple thing. The Torah is saying, it's hot enough? It's hot.
It's cool. It's on now. It's on. I can feel it. Is it? Yeah. Okay.
So, what the Torah is actually teaching is like this. If a poor person comes and he says, I want to be helping somebody else. You're in the mode of helping. You're in the mode of being generous and kind. You can't be generous and kind and help other people and be in a poor man's mode. It doesn't work. When you have to atone for yourself. Okay, so we look poor, rich, etc. I'm saying, you're a poor man, Nebach, you spoke Lashon Hara, you need to bring a sacrifice. Okay, you want to be poor, be poor. Also poor people sin. I'm not going to push you. But if you are doing something on behalf of others, meaning the poor person is saying, I want to help somebody else. So you're coming to be a philanthropist, you're coming to be a generous person, you're coming to help. Then there's only one mindset, the Torah says, a rich man's mindset. And you know what? Don't worry. You will be able to do it because that's your mindset. When you set your mind to do that, you'll find a way.
Yes.
And you know, when the Rebbe shared this explanation, the Rebbe said to the group of people, he said, I want to tell you a story. The Rebbe would share stories, but it wasn't a regular occurrence. Mainly the Rebbe would teach stories. Whenever the Rebbe shared a story, people would listen carefully. And even more or less frequently, the Rebbe would share a joke, which he also did sometimes. But he shared the story, and he said that when his father-in-law was the previous Chabad Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, came to America, one of the things that he wanted to do was he wanted to print the manuscripts of the third Chabad Rebbe, the Tzemach Tzedek. The third Chabad Rebbe was a great scholar. Many people would ask him halachic questions, and he would write the answers. It's called Shelot Utshuvot, questions and answers, shoot in short. And it's good to print it. Why? Because scholars, rabbis, students can read the question, read the answer, and it teaches them the answer to the question, but also shows them the way you think about halachic questions, the mindset, so they can then translate the idea when they get questions as being rabbis. And therefore the Rebbe wanted it to be printed, because if it's in manuscript, it's very hard. One person has it. When it's printed, anyone can buy it. So he wanted many copies of it, and should be printed and easily accessible to all. But the printing was a lot of money. So the Rebbe shares the story of the previous Rebbe. He went to one of his Hasidim and he said, look, I want to ask you to do this mitzvah. I want to ask you to push yourself and print the shoot of the Tzemach Tzedek in many copies, thousands of copies, that it can be accessible for. And the Rebbe shared that this Chassid said, no problem, Rebbe, I'm doing it straight away. No question asked. And he went and he printed it, cost him a lot of money. The Rebbe said that shortly after he printed it, he made a business deal and he earned a lot of money, much more than the cost of the printing, which covered the printing. Plus, he had a surplus that he could use for himself and enjoy. And the Rebbe said that what was amazing was that this Chassid, when he was asked to do it, he didn't have the money. But nonetheless, he agreed. And the Rebbe said, I'll share with you a secret. Not only he didn't have the money, this only a tzaddik can say like the Rebbe, even from Shamayim, it wasn't allotted to him. You know, it says on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, there's an allotment of a potential of wealth a person will have. And then the bracha is to bring it down. That it should manifest through the channels, through the work. So it works like this. Hashem allots it. It doesn't necessarily come down. If you do the right things, then it will come down. This guy, the Rebbe said, it wasn't even allotted. It wasn't portioned aside for him. For if he does the right business, it will come. But because he said, I'm doing it, the channels in above in Shamayim were filled with more potential that wouldn't have come his way. So you see that because this man said, I'm rich, I'm ready to do it, it happened. And that's what the Torah is teaching us. Richness of the mind is what's important. The rest is less important. So if you're deciding that you want to be a philanthropist, you want to care, you want to help, go for it. And everything will come in place. If you're going to be narrow-minded, that's okay for yourself. But not when it comes to being somebody who's helping others, etc. And that's what the Torah is teaching. And that's why it's very important for us to know. En ani ela bedat. Poverty is in the mind. That's it. If you decide to be rich in the mind, you will see that everything will flow. Materialism follows spiritualism and not the other way around. And therefore it's very important to be open-minded and to think big, and then the reality will happen. And it's not only, by the way, with finance. It's with everything. It's with your attitude to your spouse. It's with your attitude to your children. You know, many times people, they say, my spouse was so bad, it's so this, that. But when they change their mind, they said, no, I've got a good spouse, and it's actually me, and I need to open my mind and see. They discover the most amazing wealth in their spouse. The whole problem was in their mind. It was narrow-minded. The same thing is with children. Many times we label our kids as a failure. We decide that because they haven't done well here or there, or because they have one small thing, so they're a failure and it's not good as their sister or their brother, etc. But when we show the children that they're amazing and we highlight their good side and we tell them how good they are, suddenly we discover that the child is amazing. You know, many times I see parents with their kids, I have so much problems with this child. They never help, or they always speak a chutzpah, or they're... And why? Because the kid could be amazing and could have many qualities, but the parents, as we tend to zoom in and home in only into the one thing that they're not good at, and that's what we talk about. We're trying to help them on this area, but instead we are labeling them, you are a failure, this is your problem, this is who you are, and they stay a failure. But when you take a child and you say to them, wow, you were so kind to your siblings, or you helped me so nicely, or you did so well in this particular area, big them up, you know what you'll discover? That your child is amazing, and it will even influence the areas that they need help. The question is where you're focusing, where your mind is. Are you poor or are you rich in the mind? That's what it's all about. And that's what the Torah is teaching us. And therefore we read this before Pesach. Because we all have poverty. It doesn't have to mean you have poverty and zeros in the bank. You could have many zeros in the bank, but you still have poverty in the mind of sharing and caring and making care. You know, saying, Hashem's given me all these gifts. How do I make a difference? When I leave this world, I'm not taking any of these zeros with me. But am I going to help? Is it going to be a difference because of me? That's one poverty that many people suffer from. There could be another poverty in spirituality, where people can increase in their Yiddishkeit, in their observance of Shabbat, of Kashrut, of Tarat HaMishpacha, whatever. And so narrow-minded, there is no, I can never do that. Because you decided. But if you decide that you could do it, suddenly not only you can do it, it'll even be easy. You'll do it like a rich man does it. Like the biggest rabbi does it. Many times people say to me, Rabbi, of course you do it because you're a rabbi, so you keep kosher at that level, or you study or whatever. By the way, we all have our challenges. Rabbis, not rabbis. It's deciding in your mind, I can do it. And you see that you can do it. The poor man in this week's parasha, he says, I can do it. He does it. So, number one, the Torah is teaching us, you need to think like a rich man, and everything will follow. And he's talking to a poor man. Physically, he doesn't have the money. The Torah says, don't worry. You decided you're doing it, bring a rich man. Everything will fall into place. Like the story that the Rebbe shared. So that's the idea. But how do we narrow it down a bit more for ourselves to say, okay, I understand. I need to think like a rich man. And if I think, poverty is in the mind. I don't want to be a poor man in my mind. I want to be rich in my mind. So what should we be thinking? Where should the attitudes, apart from the things that we mentioned, you will see another fascinating thing also in Parashat Tazria Metzora, where we have to think broad in the mind. And this will explain again, because first of all, we set up tonight, this is what Pesach's about. Pesach's liberation from Egypt. Egypt means, Mitzrayim in Hebrew, Meitzar. What does a Meitzar in Hebrew mean?
Tzar.
Tzar. Tzar is narrow. And liberation from Egypt means escaping our narrow-mindedness.
And there's Yetzer inside between the two men.
Correct, 100%. So, though being poor is Mitzrayim, being rich is escaping Mitzrayim. So that's the first thing about Pesach. That's why we read Parashat Metzora to teach us that we need to escape this Tzar. Metzora also has the letters of Tzar in it, narrowness, so we want to break through. But let's see another beautiful idea in Parashat Tazria Metzora, which will help us sharpen this point and see how we need to be broad in our mind. And I think it's also very well connected to what Am Yisrael is going through at the moment with all our enemies and our foes around. Because this parasha is all about how to purify. So we discussed that it's to do with the sacrifices and what to bring. But there's one fascinating way that the person who has a leprosy becomes pure even without the sacrifice. How's that? If a person has leprosy, he can become pure without any sacrifices. Mikvah he has to do anyway. That's part of the purifying process of the leper. So if a person is destined, he needs mikvah, then he needs a sacrifice, he needs everything. Which way can a leper become pure without anything?
Praying?
No. So although this week's parasha talks about the purification, what I'm looking for is in last week's parasha. So last week's parasha, the Torah tells us that there's a way a person who is a fully leper, and then he can become pure without anything. Truth is, he was never announced as an impure person, but he would have been, but he doesn't. He becomes pure. And this is like this. The Torah says, if a person has a patch, leprosy, and he comes to the Kohen, and the Kohen is not sure, what does he do? The Kohen would say to him, you need to go back for a week, go away, quarantine, come back after a week, and I'll check. If it's expanded, then it means it's leprosy. But what happened if the Kohen sends him away, and he comes back, and not only has it expanded, but rather it's gone on his entire body? What do you think the case is? Suddenly, the Kohen looks at him from head to toe. The guy's got a leprosy. What happens? If it expands a little bit, then we know it's leprosy and it becomes announced impure. But if it's expanding on the whole body, the Torah says, Ta'aru, is pure. And that doesn't make sense, right? How can that be? How can it be? Imagine a guy goes to the doctor and he's got a black spot. The doctor says, oh, this doesn't look good. This could be a gangrene, or I don't know. Let's watch. Come in a week's time. It comes a week's time and it's spread. The doctor will say, oy vey, this is a gangrene, it's serious. Imagine he comes back a week's time and it's all his whole body's all black from top. The doctor says, you're okay, go home. Would that make sense? Or he'd send him to intensive care.
You're pure guy.
You're pure guy. It doesn't make sense.
It came out of his body and it's gone.
It's all over. If it's all gone, then you're right. But the Torah says if he's got tzarat lechol marei ene kohen merosho ve'ad raglo taru, he's because the Torah, the Kohen announces him pure.
Sometimes the doctor says to you because if it's a virus, if it all comes out, then
Yeah, but the virus is gone.
Yeah,
Nothing
that's,
to do.
it's finished.
Homeopathy, isn't it?
So I'll tell you a story. There was once a rich man and he was doing super well and he was going on a meeting. And in his meeting, he had to do a big deal. He was going to double his money. And in those days, there was no bank transfers and, Revolut or apps. So how did you do deals? You took all your money with you. So he took all his money, a lot of money in a suitcase. And on his way to the meeting, he was tired. So he rested by a tree. He fell asleep, woke up. Oh, I'm late for my meeting. Quickly got on a horse and wagon, and he traveled. Halfway through to his meeting, he's looking around. He's looking for his suitcase with all the money. It's gone. So he remembered that he forgot it by the tree. So he told his assistant, that's it, I'm doomed. I'll become poor overnight. So his assistant said, no, maybe the money's under the tree. So he said, yeah, come on. Imagine you leave a thing on the wayside. People travel. It wasn't there, it was on a thoroughfare. What do you think? If he goes back, it's there?
Yes.
So the assistant encouraged him to go back. So he went back. He traveled 2 hours.
It wasn't there.
And it was there. He couldn't believe it. He said, what? Unbelievable. What a muzzle. Like, imagine you drop a suitcase here on Fairfax Road, on Finchley Road, full of money.
It's happened to me.
Happened?
Yeah, not with the money, but with the jewelry.
With the jewelry? What happened?
And we went back and we found it, but someone told me, no, it's not going to be there.
Where was it?
Valuable.
Where was it?
Whatever.
Outside somewhere?
So the rich man, he started crying. The assistant couldn't understand why he's crying. He just found all this money. Anyway, fast forward many years later, a few years later, the rich man was doing bad deals, lost all his money. Became poor, he had to let the assistant go, he couldn't afford him. So the assistant went, he did his own job, but because he'd been next to the rich man for many years and he saw everything, so the assistant became a businessman. He was doing well, he became very rich. So one day the assistant, who's now a rich man, gets a knock on the door, it's Erev Shabbat. He opens the door, a beggar asking for money. So he looks at the beggar and says, you? I can't believe it. Who was it? The rich man, his previous boss. He said, I understood that you lost your money. I thought you become a regular guy, but to become a poor person collecting, I cannot believe. He said, look, come with me for Shabbat. I will host you, I'll look after you, and I'll give you a big loan after Shabbat. I'll set you up, we'll put you back on track. So the rich man thanked him, the previous rich man. He said, okay, well, I need to go to mikvah. Where's the mikvah? So he showed him the mikvah. He told him, go right, left, whatever. So he went to the mikvah. And the assistant, who's now a rich man, is waiting for him to come home. And an hour's passed. He hasn't come, 2 hours. Something's really wrong. So he runs to the mikvah. And he sees the rich man, he's standing on the bench and he's dancing, he's happy. He said, what's the matter? He says, I went into the mikvah. When I was in the mikvah, another poor man came and he stole my shoes. So I couldn't have any shoes. I didn't have any shoes to wear. I couldn't come back to you. So he said, okay, wait. The assistant ran home, brought a new pair of shoes, gave him. Anyway, they spent Shabbat together, had a great time. Motzei Shabbat, he calls him over. He says, look, this is a business that today is a good business. Everyone's buying and selling. You need some money to invest. Here's the money. Go on your way. I bless you with success. And he gave him enough seed funding to start a new business. But he said to him, listen, before you go, I have a question. He said, what? He said, you remember all those years ago they stole your suitcase? Why were you crying? So he said, I'll tell you why. He said, life is a cycle. Sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down. It's never always up. So it goes up, up, up. At some point you reach the peak and it starts going down. He said, my muscle was always going up, up, up. I was always doing well. He said, but when I found that suitcase on the street with so much money and no one taking it, that's a muzzle that's like unbelievable. So I said to myself, this is the peak of muzzle. It can't go any higher. From it, it's only going to go down. So I started crying. He said, and indeed, that's what happened. He said, so why were you laughing in the mikvah? He said, I'll tell you why. He said, because my muzzle was going down, 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 down. I lost all my money. I sold my business. Got to let go of my redundancies. I thought it can't go any worse. It became worse. I started collecting money. Became a schnorrer. I thought it can't go any worse than that. And then I'm in the mikvah. The only thing I own is my pair of shoes. And even that's gone. I said to myself, rock bottom can't be any more than this. From here, it's only going to go up. As J.K. Rowling, she once said, she said, my rock bottom turned out to be the solid foundation which I built my entire life again. So, and indeed, he became a wealthy man again. So you see that there's a concept in Judaism which is called rock bottom. That from here can only go up. And that's what the Torah is actually teaching us. If the leper becomes leper all over, that's rock bottom. There's no more place they can be contaminated. So from now it can only go upwards. From here, you move forward, you move up. From here, this is the beginning. Tahor. Now you stop. There's no more tameh. You can't be anymore. So it's got to be. The way it works, the cycle is that when you come to a situation where it's all bleak and black and there's no more purity, from here you start going up. And that's indeed the story of Pesach. Because if you look in the story of Pesach, Hashem sends Moshe Rabbeinu to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. What happens? What does Pharaoh say?
No.
He says, if you're asking me to free the Jews, that means that your mind is on freedom. You have too much time to think. I need to make you work even harder. Remember? So what does he say? They need to go and collect the straw. So the poor people are so upset. And the guys who are in charge of the Jewish people, they tell Moshe Rabbeinu, look what you've done to us. Lama ta'aseh kol avadecha. They say to Pharaoh, what are you doing? The poor guys, they're already working a quota which was unbelievable to finish a day. But that was, they were receiving the produce, the bricks. But now they need to go and collect.
Yeah, they need to
Start from even scratch to go and find the straw to make the bricks. How are they going to have time? And they have to keep the same quota. Doesn't make sense. So Moshe Rabbeinu complains to Hashem and he says, "Ume'az bati el paro ledaber b'shmecha, hera la'am hazeh v'atel lo italta et amecha." Since I came, things have become even worse. So Hashem says to Moshe Rabbeinu, don't worry. You will see that now it's going to be good and they're going to leave Egypt and Pharaoh's going to send them away and they're going to have amazing salvation. So the Rebbe asks a question. He says, Hashem tells Moshe and the seed is going to be good. But he doesn't answer his question. Why is it that since he came, it became worse? But what's the answer? The answer was that Hashem was bringing the wheel in order to start the process of liberation, of salvation. The wheel had to go even further down because that's the way it is. Before you have light is the darkest point. So Hashem said to him, okay, we're going to make it so dark that now it's going to be the beginning of good. And it's interesting. Remember we learned the shiur about the shalshelet, the note, and what it meant? Actually, when it comes to this note that was going so bad, there's also a very rare note. It's called the mercha kfula. Lama ta'aseh, the ta'aseh, the mercha kfula, which is only 5 times in the Torah. And this mercha kfula means the name of the note is double meaning. Kaful is double. Because really what the Torah is hinting to us is this negative, bad, hard worship of Pharaoh had a double meaning. Externally, the people saw that it's become worse. But really the double meaning is that the worse is the beginning of the good. So even the note is teaching us this idea, as the Rebbe explained. So in life, sometimes we have something which is so bad, but that's why there's even somebody who comes to our Chabad and told me and shared with me that her life was in shambles, separating from her boyfriend. Amex and Visa and all the credit cards were after her like Meshuggah. Spiritually, she felt empty and nothing there. And she felt that that's it. I cannot go any lower than this. And that was the turning point. That's where suddenly everything started working out and she became so much more happier and spiritual and connected to Hashem and everything started falling into place. But when did that happen? Not until it became rock bottom. And indeed, this is what you see in life. And this is really what this parasha is teaching us. It's a springboard. That's why it says, Tahor Hu. He becomes spiritual to teach us that Pesach is about liberation. And it's about thinking rich. And if a person says, yeah, but look how low I am, that's precisely the point that you can turn and say, actually, this is the beginning of the good. But it's a mindset. And this will explain to us a fascinating thing in the Haggadah. I'm sure you read the Haggadah every year. And you read the story of Rabbi Akiva. Do you remember that story? Anyone remember? Ma'aseh Rabbi Akiva it starts. The Rabbi Eliezer ben Azariah, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Tarfon, right? It tells 5 sages, Shahayu Mesubim b'Bnei Brak. They were sitting in Bnei Barak and they were having a Seder. Look, it's right at the beginning of the Haggadah. That's right, and they were sitting the entire night. It's time to read the Shema. Now, many people read this story, but they miss something very, very important. And what do they miss about this story? Question is, why were all the rabbis in Bnei Brak? Where's a rabbi normally on Pesach? Huh? Don't worry about them. Leave them. They can come and go.
Police.
Maybe they wanna, they wanna come and participate in the shiur. But why were they in Bnei Brak?
I will go.
No, it's okay. Why were they in Bnei Brak? In Haggadah, there's a story of 5 rabbis that were in Bnei Brak. Normally, where does a rabbi stay?
Jerusalem.
With his community? With his family? I think it would not make sense to say that they brought their families. First of all, it wasn't hotels, and it was very hard. Each one of them had families, kids, children, grandkids. They would bring them all. They pack in the house of Rabbi Akiva. Besides, there was no buses. You couldn't, or taxi. Just order an Uber. Yalla, you go to Rabbi Akiva to Bnei Brak. They were living in different cities all around Israel. It was sometimes a day, 2 days, or even a week, depending where these rabbis were living. So they set out a week before Pesach to be with Rabbi Akiva. They abandoned their families. They abandoned their communities. Why? If you told me they went to Yerushalayim, I know there's a mitzvah called Aliyah LaRegel. So maybe they want to go to Jerusalem. But why go to Bnei Brak? You ever thought of it? You remember that story or not?
Yes,
So they were traveling.
A rabbi traveling, what? And you know what? Normally, who was the student? Who was the rabbi? In this case, so the Nasi at the time was Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. He was the leader. There was other Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer. They were the teachers of Rabbi Akiva, and the other ones was Kohanim, Levim. Rabbi Akiva was the son of a convert. So both on a social level, he was the lowest. As a student, he was the lowest. He wasn't even the chieftain of Am Yisrael. He was a rabbi of Bnei Brak. So why are they coming to him? If anything, it should be the other way around. He's a student, he should go to his rabbi. It says, Chayav Adam lakbil et pnei rabo baregel. There is such a commandment to go visit your rabbi during the festival. Okay, but Rabbi Akiva was the student, not the rabbi. So you can't say that they were coming to see their rabbi. You can't say they were coming to Yerushalayim because it was in Bnei Brak. So it doesn't make sense why they were there, and also it doesn't make sense how could they leave their families. Anyone have a suggestion? And why would the Haggadah tell us this story? To encourage us to leave our communities, to abandon our families, go sit with some rabbi in Bnei Brak.
Was it a small community in Bnei Brak?
It was, of course, it was a small community, but based on what we've just learned, Parashat Tazria Metzora all makes sense, because the whole idea of Pesach is about
Okay.
open-mindedness, understanding that rock bottom is solid foundation for the beginning. Am Yisrael at that moment was holding exactly at that point. If you know the history, at that time, the temple had been destroyed. This was literally after the destruction of the temple. And everyone was so down. Could you imagine your temple, the house of Hashem? And they couldn't understand why this is happening to them. Not only that, the Romans had killed thousands of people. It had been the biggest, genocide that the people of Am Yisrael had experienced in hundreds of years. So they lost physically, spiritually. They'd been attacked by missiles from Iran. They'd been attacked by Gazinians who had come into Israel and slaughtered thousands of people. They were in a similar situation to us mentally. Everyone's saying, what's going to be? All the world is against us. Anti-Semitism is prevalent in the streets. They were in a terrible time. The Rebbe actually points out that that's hinted in Haggadah when it says, Kol halayla. Kol halayla means all the night. The, in Hebrew and in English, means the famous night. It means it's talking about, it should have said throughout the night. What's the night?
The only one.
So which night? So the Rebbe says it's pointing to the night, i.e. the darkness, the exile. It's representing a much deeper concept. We're not talking about the fact that outside it was night and not day, but rather the whole mental situation. People were in rock bottom. They were in the famous night situation. Already the Torah told us the people are going to go through a terrible time. And if you're in a situation of night, you're in a mode of narrow-mindedness, night, darkness. Where do you go for inspiration? To Rabbi Akiva. He might have been their student for Torah. He might have been their student for mitzvot and for halacha. But he was their Rebbe for broad-mindedness. If there was one person at the time who understood, En ani ela b'da'at, poverty is in the mind. If there was one person who understood that rock bottom is the beginning of light, was Rabbi Akiva. And how do we know this? We know this from the Talmud in many stories, but one famous one was, our rabbis tell us that shortly before this Pesach, Rabbi Akiva and the sages were walking on the mountains of Jerusalem. And they saw a fox roaming on the ruins of Temple Mount. So the rabbi started crying. Rabbi Akiva started laughing. So the rabbi said to Rabbi Akiva, "You're nuts. You're laughing. You see such a terrible thing. Why are you laughing?" He said, "Why am I laughing? Why are you crying?" They said, "Why are we crying? Temple Mount, the Holy of Holies, a place that it says that if a person is a goy comes, he will get killed. But even a Jew who's not a Kohen, he goes into the places which are pure, they would get killed. A Jew. So to have a fox, which is a not kosher animal, and he's going on Kodesh HaKodashim, on the Holy of Holies, and you don't must cry. The house of Hashem is so desecrated that unkosher animals are just roaming there. That's why we cry. You know what Rabbi Akiva said? That's why I laugh. He said, why? He said, we have two prophecies. Two great prophecies. One was from a prophet of doom who said to the Jewish people, if you don't repent and if you don't do good, there will come a time when foxes will roam Temple Mount. He says, we have another prophecy, a prophet of hope, who tells us, oh, the Yeshvuz, there will come a time when Mashiach will come. And there will be peace and harmony and tranquility, and people will sit under their fig tree and rest in the shade of the sun, and they'll see their children, flourishing, and everyone will be prosperous. So when I heard this about Mashiach coming and the time when there'll be no wars and everything will be amazing, I thought, Mashiach, how can that happen? That's, living in cuckoo land. But then when I saw that the prophecy of the fox was fulfilled, and I saw that the prophets were right, so if they were right with that, now I'm comforted that they'll be right with the other one, and Mashiach will come. So instead of seeing it as something negative, he sees it as something positive. This was Rabbi Akiva. He was the ultimate optimist. He always saw only the good in every situation. It's dark. You know what that means? It's the beginning of the cycle of light. Don't be narrow-minded. Don't be poor in the mind. Be rich in the mind. You can only see the cycle of light coming up, see darkness and see the beginning of light if you're rich in the mind. If you're narrow in the mind, then you'll see it's bad. I was talking to somebody and I said, in my mind, this is what's going on right now. We are at the bottom of the cycle. Before, you thought maybe there's problems living in Russia, Ukraine, and Western countries, England, America. We're okay. Suddenly we see the ugly head of anti-Semitism rearing its face in such a terrible way. Hundreds of thousands of people demonstrating against Israel in the streets constantly. You'd think that after the massacre that happened in the envelope of Gaza, they'd be with us. Yeah, maybe for a day, maybe for a week. But very quickly everyone forgot. And we're the ones that are creating genocide. And we're the ones who are being unfair. There's 130 captives right now in Gaza. But what do people talk about? The poor people, the Gazanians, they need, all this food, and we got a, humanitarian. What humanitarian in your head? These guys are terrorists the same as everyone else. They're the ones that support Hamas, vote Hamas, and help them right now. They could stop in 1 second. They know where the captives are. They could rebel against Hamas and bring them in 1 minute and stop the whole thing, but they don't. They rejoice in our suffering. And there was a poll not so long ago asking the Arabs, do they support Hamas? And you're talking about 90+% supporting them still. So which innocent Gazan? No such thing. It doesn't exist. And the world doesn't see that. What they see, we are creating genocide. When we killed 7 innocent people who were offering aid, the whole world went up in arms. But when America killed 3,000 people in the war of Iraq, no one said anything. When they bombed the hospital in Mosul with 800 innocent people, no one said anything. No one said genocide, only we genocide. Israel killed their own soldiers by mistake. They killed their own captives by mistake. So these things happen in war. No one sees that. You killed 7 innocent people. So the whole world is against us. Anti-Semitism is bad. 300 missiles coming, ballistic missiles. Yes, we may have the Iron Dome and a miracle from Hashem. But this is still a crazy situation. So I said to somebody, this is rock bottom. From here, the cycle can only go up and go Mashiach. And he said, Rabbi, no, it can go worse. That is narrow-minded. So who says it's the bottom? No, imagine, it could be worse. It reminds me of the difference. Someone said to me, what's the difference between an optimist and a pessimist? I said, well, the pessimist, he says, it's so bad it can't get any worse. The optimist said, no, it can get any worse. It can get that type of optimists we need. This is exactly the point of Pesach. Don't be narrow-minded. Because a narrow-minded person can say, it can get worse. Because enani ela b'dat. You could look around and say, but it can still be worse than now. Or you could be like Rabbi Akiva. He chose that point to say, it's the worst, it's only going forward. By the way, you look at the rich man in the story, when it was at the top, he started crying. He said it can't go any better. That was his problem. That's why it started going down. Had he said, no, it can still go up more, maybe it would have continued. Everything's in the mind. When you decide something, that's what happens. So Pesach is a call, Yetziat Mitzrayim. You need to leave Egypt. How do you leave Egypt? Decide in your mind to be broad-minded, to be rich, financially, spiritually, socially. And this is what the Rebbe taught us, by divine providence. In 2 days' time is the Rebbe's birthday, with Aleph Nisan. And who is the Rabbi Akiva of our generation? All the rabbis, they traveled, they left their homes to be with Rabbi Akiva. They needed this inspiration. They wanted to hear, how do you become a rich man in the mind? How did you see everything positively? They said it's worth us leaving our communities. It's worth us leaving our families, spending Pesach in this night, because we want. And by the way, they said that students, Gadal says, they told Rabbi Akiva and the other rabbis, it's time, morning's arrived. But the rabbis need to be reminded. What they meant to say is, light's arrived. We understand, we get it. You've inspired us. Rabbi Akiva taught them the entire night. He explained the message of positiveness that they said, dawn's here. We get it. We're no longer in darkness. We are no longer narrow-minded. We've done Yetziat Mitzrayim. We've managed to break the shackles of this narrow-mindedness. We see the good. We see the positive. We're ready to go and fight. The Rebbe in our generation is the Rabbi Akiva. Everything that was negative, the Rebbe saw as positive. The Rebbe kept calling upon us, to see every sign out there as a sign of Mashiach. It says when Mashiach comes, everyone will know in 1 minute. 300 years ago, even 100 years ago, it's nonsense. Send the telegrams. What are you going to do? Send the post, call it. It's going to take time. Today you Twitter one thing, the whole world knows. So the Rebbe said, this is a sign of Mashiach. It says when Mashiach comes, everyone will be healed. All the medicine and the doctors that we have today, old people, and it's all signs of Mashiach. Today that they can manufacture food in a way they could never do before. It's a sign of Mashiach. All these unbelievable things. How the world comes together as a coalition to help and provide the United Nations. It's all sign of Mashiach. There's still plenty of problems.
So is he here?
But the Rabbi, of course he is. He just needs to be revealed. And it depends on each and every one of us to have that open-mindedness. En ani ela bedat. There's no problem. Usa geula, redemption is in the mind. Galut, exile is in the mind. You know the difference between galut and geula? Is one letter. Gola is exile. Geula is redemption. You put an aleph in between the two letters of Gola, you move up, you get Geula. Aleph is the oneness of Hashem. The second you introduce Hashem into your life, the oneness of God, suddenly you have redemption. Mashiach is waiting for each and every one of us to be ready. And how? It's not about, of course, it's about doing mitzvot and Torah. The more we do, we make the world better. But how do we make ourselves better? How do we make ourselves? We need to live Mashiach mindset. Once we have Mashiach mindset, it will also materialize. The rich man, remember we said at the beginning, he said, can't be anymore. You know what happened? It went down. The second he said he can't go any further, it went up. If we say, you know what, exile's not so bad. I still have my fast cars. I still have my holidays. I still have my nice clothes. You know, it will stay. But the second we say, no, Mashiach mindset, we can't reach any rock bottom more, Mashiach will come. That is the message of Pesach. Bezrat Hashem, like we had the first redemption in the month of Nisan, we'll have the final redemption in the month of Nisan. Nisan was all about miracles. We just experienced the most amazing miracles. Bezrat Hashem, Nisim and Niflaot, we will see many more, with the ultimate miracle of the coming of Mashiach. But it all depends on each and every one of us. And ani ela bedat, don't be poor in your mind. You decide to be rich. Start with mitzvot, start with charity. See what you could do that you could never do before. And then start with your family, continue with your family, continue with your friends, continue with your spirituality. And you will see the ripple effects. It will have such an effect on this materialistic, crass and low world that Mashiach will come. And then we'll have true liberation. Chazak u'baruch.
מה ההבדל בין גלות וגאולה?
And then really the Shana Abba B'Yerushalayim.